Sometime in the 21st century, mankind honors its saviors by constructing the Hall of Heroes, where only the strongest and most just can be inducted. Flash forward 100 years, there have been no new entries in the Hall of Heroes, and the last 6 heroes left have become corrupt and rest on their fame. You play as Rin, a girl who believes she deserves to be the first true hero of the 22nd century, but first she has to take out the 6 current heroes to be recognized, which is a little morbid. I mean, at one point you have to go into a dragon's body and destroy its beating heart. Bleed offers up a pretty bare-bones story, almost all of it being delivered in the intro cutscene. There are a couple of cutscenes sprinkled in towards the end of the game, but all in all it's a little lackluster. Not to say there's anything wrong with what's there though, I would just like to have seen a little more. It seems like Bleed was trying a little too hard to emulate an early 8-bit gaming experience by giving the player only the essentials to form a plot. But in a fast-paced platforming shooter, story is very rarely the focus, and maybe that's for the best. Fast, frantic, and very difficult, Bleed is part of a small minority of twin-stick shooters that have done away with the top-down or isometric views, instead going for a side-scrolling approach that makes it feel like the forbidden love affair between Max Payne and Mega Man. Controlling Rin can be a little hard to get used to at first. The left stick moves her body and the right stick aims her weapons. This by itself is simple. I mean, this is what we're used to with twin-stick shooters, but it's when you throw the game's other 2 mechanics into the mix that things get a little tricky. Pressing the right trigger will make Rin jump or air dash, and left trigger initiates slow motion. When things start to get difficult, you'll be running, jumping, shooting, changing targets, and air dashing all in slow motion. When I got over the initial shock of doing so many conflicting things at once, I fell right into Bleed's gameplay style, and from there on, it was all up to quick thinking and reflexes. When the screen was filled with bullets, I felt like a badass whizzing through them and taking out enemies. But regardless of how acclimated you are with the controls, Bleed is a very difficult game. Your first playthrough of a new level almost feels unfair, but after a few tries you start to learn the patterns of the stage and the enemies in it. When you have the patterns down, the game becomes a practice in perfecting your playthroughs, learning when to jump in a gap of bullets, how often to air dash, and what weapon to use on the game's toughest nails bosses. Speaking of which, your selection of weapons aren't exactly varied in the beginning, but after completing levels you'll be rewarded with points that you can use to purchase more powerful weapons and upgrades to your health and slow-mo. This gives the game a good amount of replayability, and gave me flashbacks of Devil May Cry 3. Going through previous levels to get more points becomes even more fun when you notice this little guy right here. Taking risk and avoiding damage will improve your rank, which will in turn give you more points to spend. When I first started playing, I was dying left and right, and I couldn't help but feel like the game wasn't playing fair. But after I got my head wrapped around the subtle intricacies of Bleed's controls and its enemy patterns, the game really opened up to me. I was dodging shots at the last minute, dashing through obstacles, and taking out bosses in record time. Much like the 8-bit games that inspired it, Bleed requires you to put in time to master it. And for me, this is a welcome return to the tough gameplay, smooth controls, and fair challenges that we used to see so much in the games of our childhood. As if it were somehow a worldwide mandate for indie-developed games, Bleed is 2D and sprite-based. Now I can understand taking this route, but I wish developers would put a little more personality into their sprite work. Games like Cave Story has shown us that you can create vibrant, unique characters even within the limitations that comes with 2D sprites. This isn't to say Bleed looks bad, because it clearly doesn't. I guess my biggest problem is with Rin. She just seems a little too simple and really could have benefited from a little more personality in her sprite. Luckily, stages, enemies, and bosses don't share this problem. Each level is uniquely different from the last, both in flow and design. At one point you're running through futuristic ventilation ducts, and shortly after that you're inside an apple being digested by a mammoth dragon. And each experience is played slightly different. Enemies and bosses benefit from the same varied design. They all complement their respective stages and form a pretty cohesive picture overall. While the bosses weren't as monstrous as I would have liked, they are unique as hell, and this gives the game a lot more of that polished feeling. Overall, I would say Bleed's graphics are pretty pleasing to the eye. The main character may seem a little bland, but the varied and interesting enemies, stage layouts, and weapon effects more than compensate. After spending some time with Bleed, I have to say I'm pretty impressed. But it's definitely not perfect, so let's take a look at the ups and downs of this weird little game. With the price of $4.99 on Steam, Bleed is a rare occasion of getting more out of a game than what you spent on it. The game has a pretty large assortment of weapons, and each feels and plays drastically different from each other. No one can say no to some fast-paced, blistering, in-your-face action, and Bleed has this in spades. Bleed's scoring system will entice you to take another crack at its levels in hopes of beating your own score, and this gives the game a good amount of replay value. This game was made with dual analog controllers in mind, and while keyboard and mouse support is there, it's damn near impossible to play with them. The main character looks a little too simple for me, and could have used a little more visual personality. All in all, I had a really good time with Bleed. Its cheap price, frantic, skill-based gameplay, and overall feel make it more than worth your time. Taking its cues from the best platformers of my childhood and adding slow motion, Bleed is a killer experience that I highly recommend to any fan of breakneck speed and challenging game mechanics. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. So until next time, I'm Jared, and this has been Avalanche Reviews. Hey, thanks for watching, guys. If you got into this video, I reviewed another indie game called Cry of Fear, and you can get to it right here. And if you want to watch something else, I'll probably put something over here on the other side. But thanks for watching again, guys, and if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook or Twitter, and I even have an Instagram now, because I know some of you were worried you weren't seeing enough pictures of my cats and video game collection. So, there you go.